Hi everyone, old guy here. You know, back in the Old West, it was pretty much a walkover when the U.S. cavalry met the Indians. And yes, I'm going to say Indians because I speak English. It was always a foregone conclusion that the band, whichever tribe it was, Comanche, Cherokee, was going to be massacred. Just ask Black Kettle. Just ask Wavoka. But there came a point, pretty much an exact point, when the Indians figured out their usual response to cavalry attacks weren't working. And they changed their tactics. That point was the Fetterman Massacre, which really is a misnomer. It's actually the first real battle of Red Cloud's War, and Red Cloud won. This novel is the fictionalized accounts of the events leading up to that horrific battle in the Powder River Valley of Wyoming and Montana in 1866, told mainly from the viewpoint of Crazy Horse, probably one of the best tactical fighters ever produced on the North American continent. It follows events beginning with the 1866 expedition by U.S. Army Colonel Carrington to establish a fort in the middle of the valley because, you see, there's gold in them thar hills. And that meant the U.S. was willing to abandon all their old treaties and run roughshod over the Indians in their zeal to get at the yellow, shiny ore. I mean, why should this time be any different? So the U.S. Army heads out, undermanned and underarmed, to brush aside those heathen, barbarian Indians. Why, one good cavalry officer was worth at least 100 savages. But these savages were Lakota and Minneconjou Sioux, and Cheyenne, and Arapaho, and they are led by Red Cloud and Crazy Horse. Cavalry didn't stand a chance. This novel pulls no punches, giving the warts and all of all the persons involved. Carrington is a political appointee with no real fighting experience, his captains and lieutenants holding him in contempt because the majority of them are seasoned veterans of the Civil War. They are, mostly to a man, convinced a stand-up fight against the Sioux will be just as effective as a stand-up fight against the Confederates. Boy, are they wrong. And boy, is Carrington the wrong guy to be in charge of these people. An extraordinary engineer and logistician, he is a vacillating combat commander and gives in far too much the opinions of Lieutenant Drummond, an arrogant, wife-beating bigamist who does not understand the enemy he faces. Captain Fetterman, one of the senior officers, should have braced the young lieutenant on the numerous occasions Drummond defied Colonel Carrington. But Fetterman vacillates and earns history's infamy, because the massacre is named after him, which may or may not be justified. Carrington and his second wife, the widowed Mrs. Drummond, spent much of their lives after the massacre blaming it on Fetterman and off Carrington. Punk puts forth a very convincing scenario that it was Drummond who initiated the attack and led the army into Red Cloud's trap. Fetterman had no choice but to try and rescue him. And it makes sense. Wait a minute. Drummond's widow becomes Carrington's second wife? Well, they didn't call it the Wild West for nothing. Some of my favorite Old West novel characters are in this novel, such as Jim Bridger. the famous and quite extraordinary mountain man of whom mountain ranges are named. There's James Beckworth, also known as Bullsrobe. The Black Scout and Trapper, who was also an adopted Crow war chief, had dozens of wives, and is just a hoot. There's Nelson Story, the downright certifiable Montana miner who drove thousands of cattle from Texas right through the middle of Red Cloud's war to his mining camp. Wow! Throughout the novel, you get insight into the life of the post through two sets of journals that the newly married Mrs. Grumman, I mean newly married to Lieutenant Grumman, not having been married to Colonel Carrington yet, because massacre hadn't happened yet. Well, she keeps one of these journals. She keeps both of these journals, actually. One is the public gushing available diary that her husband accesses. The other is a secret journal she keeps under lock and key, and well, I do not know if both of these journals all actually existed, but the secret diary gives far more insight into how the U.S. cavalry bumbled its way into this disaster than any official report. There is a moment of high tragedy in this novel, when both Red Cloud and Crazy Horse reach the heartbreaking conclusion that their way of life is over. They're done. All of the traditions and ways they had kept faith with over the generations have been swept away by these white locusts rampaging across the land with their superior numbers, weapons, organization, and absolutely relentless desire to crush all before them. It is one of the saddest moments in a novel that I have read in some time. Oh sure, the war goes on for almost another 10 years. Red Cloud wins temporary freedom for his people, and Crazy Horse's greatest moment still awaits him a few years in the future at the Little Bighorn. But they both know it's, at best, a rearguard action. Punk wrote The Revenant, which most of you may remember as a rather starkly brutal movie. And there's a reference to Hugh Glass in this one. There are, of course, historical inaccuracies in that movie, but I don't know if that holds true for the novel, because I haven't read The Revenant yet. And I'm sure there are some inaccuracies and anachronisms in this one, but it's okay. The story covers any inadvertent faults. Old guy here. See you later.